Good evening, everybody. We're just going to wait for everyone to join us. I can see everyone coming in now. Good evening, welcome everybody. Just waiting for everyone to join us. I can see lots of numbers going up and up and up. That's fabulous. Let's give it a few more seconds. Good evening, Dawn. Good evening, Janet. Hello. Welcome all. Welcome back. Goran in Sweden, hello. Hello to Brian. Thanks all for joining us. I think we just about got everybody. Hi, Rosalind. Okay, I think we'll get cracking and let everyone else join us as we get going. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to another of our online Naturetrek roadshows for the winter. This is in fact our 12th roadshow in this series, and this evening we'll be taking you to North America. For those of you that have joined us before, maybe a few times before so far this winter, you will see that I'm not your usual host, Sarah. I think she's worked very hard and earned an evening off, so instead you've got me as your host this evening. My name's Kerry Porteous and I'm one of the operations managers at Naturetrek. I've been working at Naturetrek for 8 years now, and I look after a whole range of countries from Sweden to Switzerland to Madagascar and a few of our tours in North America. So I work with some of our leaders that are here tonight on our Arizona and Texas tours, and I also look after our trips to Monterey Bay and New England. So usually in the winter we'd be out on the road, we'd be visiting hotels around the country, hoping to see lots of you in person, and obviously that's not been possible this evening or at all this winter. But in fact, it has been an absolute delight to be able to meet so many of you through doing these webinars. And actually, we've reached a lot more of you than we would have done in person, so that's been fabulous. In fact, our webinars have been so popular that we have now extended the series. So we are going through to the end of March now with a new selection of destinations by popular request. If you haven't seen those extra ones yet, just pop onto our website. They're all there ready for you to sign up to, so do join us. If there's any destinations that you think we haven't covered yet and you'd like to see covered, just let us know. We're very happy to hear from you, and they'll help shape our plans for the future. So we're always nice to talk about really anywhere. So we have just over 300 households joining us so far this evening, so that's great. And perhaps there's 400 or more of you tuned in. So thank you. Anyone that's new to Zoom and hasn't joined us before, do not worry, we can't see or hear you. It's just the panelists that are in the spotlight tonight. So you can go about making your cups of tea as you like, no problem at all. We have a chat function, which is to the right of your screen, I think on a laptop, and I can't remember now, on an iPad, somewhere towards the top. By all means, use the chat function. It's really lovely to hear from you and hear your comments. You can either send a message just to the panelists, just to us, or you can include all attendees as well. So if there's something you think that everyone might like to hear, something you'd like to share with everyone attending, then by all means include all attendees. We would just ask that you restrict it to now, to the interval, and to the Q&A session at the end. We understand it's quite distracting when our presenters are talking if the chat function keeps popping up whilst they're speaking, particularly for those that are watching on an iPad. So yeah, by all means use it, but just in the interval and afterwards, if that's okay. For any questions, we will be delighted to answer this evening, whether that's on one of the tours we're talking about the travel industry, the pandemic, whatever it is you'd like to ask us, by all means go for it. There is a Q&A function that we'd like you to use for that if possible. You can just type your questions. We will answer them either as we go along this evening, or we'll pick them up in the Q&A session at the end. We'll read a few of them out. So if we haven't answered you by that point, don't worry, we will come back to you. We'll just save it for the end, especially if it's something that someone else might like to hear the answer to as well. If you are on our mailing list, you will have received your shiny new brochure in the last couple of weeks. It probably landed with a big loud thump on your doormat and maybe woke you up in the morning. So do browse through that. We're really delighted by the reception it's received, and we've had lots of good bookings for later in the year and next year, so that's been fabulous, thank you. If you have not received a brochure and would like to join our mailing list and receive one, then just let us know. You can email info@naturetrek.co.uk. We'll pop one in the post to you. If you think you should have received a brochure because you think you're already on a mailing list but haven't got it yet, then again, please drop us an email because we probably should have received it by now. So we can check that out for you and see if something has gone wrong. There's also lots on our website. So if one of those tours piques your interest, whether it's something you hear about tonight or read upon later, have a look on our website because you'll also find lots of tour reports, tour itineraries, things like that on there to give you a bit more info as well. It is delightful that when we're doing these webinars that we're also able to be joined by our tour leaders as well as those of us in the office. So tonight I'm joined by Paul Stanbury and David Phillips, who are both operations managers in the Naturetrek office, but we also are honoured to be joined by Matthew Capper, one of our tour leaders sitting in Chesterfield this evening, and by Adam Dudley and Jane Dixon, who are live from Arizona. Very exciting. So we are off to North America, fantastically diverse continent, incredible scenery, fantastic wildlife watching, great accommodation, plenty of food, and I think we'll give you a really good overview of everything that the continent has to offer this evening. Certainly one of my favourite places to travel to. I've done, I think, probably two of my best ever travel adventures were in North America. One of them was RVing across California and Utah and Arizona, and the other one was camping through British Columbia, trying very hard to see bears during the daytime, but not to see them from my tent. So I think, without further ado, we will kick off with Western Canada. So I'm going to hand over to Paul, and he's going to take you there. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Kerry. Just bear with me 1 second while I share my screen. Okay, nearly there. Hopefully that'll work in a moment. Right. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in tonight. My name's Paul Stanbury. I'm, as Kerry mentioned, operations manager. I've been with Naturetrek now since 1996, so a fair number of years. I look after a wide range of our tours in sub-Saharan Africa, a variety of the cruises, obviously a few areas in North America as well, including our Canadian trips, Asia and quite a few other places too, and I occasionally let out the office to do a bit of guiding as well. So as Kerry mentioned, I'm going to start off crack on this evening with one of my favourite places on the planet, which is Western Canada and British Columbia. So I was very fortunate when I went to university to spend a year studying in the Pacific Northwest. And I absolutely fell in love with the place. The mountains, the forest, the scenery is just absolutely fabulous and home to a wonderful variety of wildlife. So I'll be focusing this evening on Vancouver Island and what's known as the Great Bear Rainforest. And the Great Bear Rainforest is over 80,000 square kilometres of temperate rainforest that stretches from North Vancouver Island up to the Alaskan border. And it's protected in 2006, but this habitat stretches from California all the way up into Alaska. So it's a vast area of rainforest. British Columbia is home to over a quarter of the world's temperate rainforest. We all heard of the plight of the tropical rainforest around the planet, but temperate is equally threatened, if not more threatened. But fortunately, British Columbia is still home to some wonderful tracts of old growth forest. So our trips fly into Vancouver. Our main tour to this region we call Canada the West. It operates in September time, and we run 3 trips per year. It's a 2-week holiday, 14 days, flies into Vancouver, then crosses to Vancouver Island, where we have 3 nights in Ucluelet on the Pacific Rim National Park, up to Zeballos for a couple of nights, and then we do some orca watching in Johnson Strait before flying over to Great Bear Lodge, a wilderness lodge right in the heart of the Great Bear rainforest. So as I say, we fly into Vancouver and we use a direct flight, either with British Airways or Air Canada. Vancouver itself is a lovely city to explore. So if you want to extend your time, maybe fly out a day earlier, fly back a day or two later and explore the city, that's great. We can arrange that for you. But around Vancouver, there's some great birding sites. We will on the tour take you to a couple of the key birding areas. For the first and the last night, we use a hotel down on the edge of Boundary Bay, where I've marked on this map, very close to the Tsawwassen ferry terminal, where we catch the ferry across to Vancouver Island. But we also, when we're here, explore the coastline of Boundary Bay. There's the mouth of the Fraser River, the very important river delta. When the tide goes out, it exposes a vast area of mud flats, home to a wide variety of birds to enjoy. So you're going to start to see your first North American species, familiar birds like the American robin. Of course, it's not a robin, it's a member of the thrush family, the Turdus thrush family, but being one of the first birds settlers saw when they went over to the Americas, they named it after the robin over here in the UK. The red-breasted nuthatch is also a common bird throughout much of North America and Canada, but it's commonly seen around Vancouver. The Rifle Reserve is a particularly nice reserve, which we'll take you to on the trip. It's a bit like a cross between Minsmere, Titchwell, reed beds, and lagoons, marshes, home to a wide variety of birds. Little rufous hummingbird. There's only about two species of hummingbird you'll see in coastal British Columbia. One is the rufous, which is a summer migrant. The other one is Anna's, which hangs around all year. As I mentioned, lots of wading birds here. In September, when we're running this tour, we're getting loads of waders that are breeding up in Alaska and Canada, migrating down along the Pacific Flyway, and they stop around Fraser River Delta and Boundary Bay to feed on their way south into South America. Huge numbers of western sandpipers and least sandpipers. You've got lesser and greater yellowlegs, dowitchers, pectoral sandpipers, maybe if you're very lucky, sharp-tailed sandpiper as well. But it's a great place to really immerse yourself in North American shorebirds. Then we drive the short distance to the Tsawwassen ferry terminal, cross the Strait of Georgia to Vancouver Island itself. And the Strait of Georgia that runs between Vancouver Island and the mainland is another flyway for migrating birds. And in September, the bays around here are full of scoter, surf scoter, white-winged scoter, black scoter, lots of divers, grebes. There's lots of lovely birds you can see on the crossing, as well as the chance of seeing some cetaceans, Dall's porpoise, or even a killer whale if you're very lucky. Then we cross over to the western side of Vancouver Island to Tofino and the Pacific Rim National Park. We have wonderful scenery of temperate old growth rainforests and mountains. We're looking here over Clayoquot Sound, the scene of the dispute between the conservationists and the loggers back in the early 1990s. The scenery here is lovely. You've got huge beaches. This is Long Beach, stretches for 11 kilometers north to south, cut by rocky headlands and backed by this most amazing temperate rainforest. A mix of western hemlock, western red cedar, Anabaptist fir and Sitka spruce, dripping with mosses and lichens. And it's a very evocative place to wander through. There's some birds here as well, of course. In September, the forests are a little quieter than they would be during the height of the breeding season, but you've got the Steller's jay, which is the west coast equivalent of the blue jay, which occurs over in the eastern side of the country. We've got the lovely red-breasted sapsucker, a woodpecker, that's quite commonly seen. You've got a good chance as well of seeing the biggest of the woodpeckers of the region, the pileated as well, and some smaller birds like Hutton's vireo, kinglets, a variety of sparrows on too. One of my favorites is the varied thrush, a beautiful orange and bluey grey thrush that's common in the forest here. And in the spring, the forests are full of the resonate to the very evocative, plaintive, sad whistle of this beautiful bird. Mammals as well as the birds. There are over 30,000 black bears on Vancouver Island. They're the common mammal, commonly seen. We'll take you out on a boat trip at low tide, out into Clayoquot Sound. And at low tide, the bears come out of the forest down onto the rocky foreshore to feed on crabs and crustaceans and other intertidal life. On these boat trips, we're actually having a quite good success at seeing wolf as well. There's quite a healthy population of wolves along the coast here. And again, in the early morning hours, they'll especially at low tide, they will come out of the forest. And if you're lucky, you'll see one such as this. This is a photograph I took a few years ago on the Western Canada trip of a wolf just sitting on the shoreline. The sandy beaches, as I say, are cut by rocky headlands. As then the tide goes out, the intertidal life here is amazing, incredibly diverse. The waters offshore are very rich. They're very nutrient rich. You have cold Alaskan waters coming down the coastline here, transporting nutrient rich water into the region. And so there's lots of wildlife to see offshore as well as on land. In these rocky headlands, we'll be looking for birds like American, like the black oyster catcher, and just offshore the beautiful harlequin duck, one of the most beautiful, I think, of all the ducks, and they're common along this stretch of coastline. They breed inland on the rocky rivers up in the temperate rainforest, but in the autumn they come down to the coast to winter. But you can go to Vancouver in the middle of the winter and you can see harlequin ducks just off the shore if you go up to Stanley Park. We'll take you on a boat trip out of Tofino, looking for whales and birds, in particular grey whales. There are the grey whales. There's a population of grey whales that spend the summer off of Vancouver Island. It is part of the 25,000 or so grey whales that migrate north-south each year between Baja California and the Bering Sea. One of the longest migrations of any mammal, over 10,000 miles, and the round trip's over 10,000 miles. But a few linger off the coast of Vancouver Island, and we'll take you there on a boat trip, take you out looking for them on a boat trip. They tend to stay fairly close inshore. They're bottom feeding cetaceans, so you stand a good chance of seeing them. And with luck, maybe humpback whale as well. Dawes porpoise, a very, very fast, speedy little cetacean, are commonly seen throughout this area, and they're quite keen on bow riding. So they'll come over to the front of the boat and bow ride and porpoise right in front of the boat, in front of you. Wonderful little black and white cetaceans. They're quite distinctive even at a range. They travel so quickly. When they come out of the water, they create a spray called a rooster tail. Other mammals as well. We've got two species of sea lion here, the massive Steller's sea lion on the right and the California sea lion on the left, a much smaller animal. The Californians can be identified by their sort of very steep forehead, almost looks like somebody's whacked them on the head with a hammer. And lots of fantastic birds as well. Again, out at sea, you've got migrating ducks and divers and gulls and terns, etc. But the Pacific Northwest is very famous for its auks, auklets, its alcids. The rhinoceros auklet here, with its little rhinoceros horn on the bill, is commonly seen out to sea. And if you're lucky, maybe even the spectacular tufted puffin as well. A really lovely bird that breeds in fairly small numbers along the coastline here. They get commoner as you go further north into Alaska. So we've been to the Pacific Rim National Park on the west coast. We have to cross back over the island onto the main highway that runs north-south along the eastern side of Vancouver Island, and we go north to a tiny little community called Zeballos. And it's a really remote little place, right again on the western coast of Vancouver Island, surrounded by mountains and temperate rainforest. And we're going here in particular to see the lovely sea otter. Sea otters were extirpated from Vancouver Island by the fur trade, but they were reintroduced in the 1970s in Nootka Sound, and they've spread north and south ever since, and they're now commonly seen around Zeballos. In fact, you can even see them around Tofino these days as well. We head out on a boat trip, and you can see a raft of 20, 30, 40 of these amazing animals all bobbing around on their backs. Back in 2011, our tour leader, Tim Melling, was exceptionally lucky. And on this Balos boat trip, they noticed something swimming across the fjord. They thought it was a seal. They got a bit closer, and it turned out to be nothing less than a puma. So this is an incredibly rare sighting. In all the years I've been going to the region, all I've seen is a tip of a puma's tail disappear into the forest. So Tim was incredibly lucky on that particular time. So again, some really interesting little birds. This is the little marbled murrelet, quite an unobtrusive little starling-like bird. They have an amazing lifestyle. This was the last North American species to have its nest described back in 1974. They've been discovered since. They're the only nest in old growth rainforest. So they are one of the flagship species of the old growth rainforest, and a bird that the conservationists are using to try to help to protect the remaining tracts of old growth in this region. And this is the sort of tree they nest in. They nest in the tops of moss-covered trees, sometimes over 80 kilometers inland. So these little birds manage to find their mossy covered branch in a single tree in the middle of a massive forest, 80 kilometers inland, which they generally return to after dark. So quite how they do it is absolutely remarkable. Then we cross over to Johnson Strait on the east coast of Vancouver Island. Of course, this is famous for its population of killer whales. That there are the main population that the boats tend to look for, called the residents. They're not resident, they follow the salmon. They come in June, July time, they stay around till October. But they follow a regular pattern, and they are fairly easy to observe. So we take a whale watching trip out of Port McNeill, looking for killer whales, and also looking for humpbacks as well, which are becoming increasingly common in this region. And then the ultimate highlight of this trip is the opportunity to fly deep into the heart of the old growth rainforest, into the Great Bear Rainforest on a float plane. It takes about 25 minutes, half an hour, flying over this spectacular scenery to one of my favorite places on earth, which is Great Bear Lodge. Only takes 16 people. This is a floating lodge. It goes up and down with the tide. We have 3 nights here, so we can enjoy this amazing landscape. You're in the middle of nowhere. Just the sound of the water lapping against the pontoon of the lodge, river otters playing outside, the birds. It just is the most peaceful, tranquil place I think I've ever been to. Surrounded by wonderful mountains. We're on the edge of the Smith Smith River here. Nekite, on the edge of the Nekite River, which is a salmon river. We explore the area by boat, so you can go out and explore by boat, especially in the spring as well. And they'll take you on boat trips up into the estuary looking for birds and mammals and other wildlife. But in September, when we're going here, we're timed at this trip for the arrival of the salmon that migrate up the rivers into British Columbia. And following the salmon are the bears. And the Great Bear Lodge, of course, is named after the Great Bear itself, the grizzly bear. And this is the place where you can go and sit and watch grizzly bears in the river fishing for salmon. They very recently they built these amazing outdoor platforms, so you can just outside platform. Rather than sitting in an enclosed hide, which you used to do, you can now sit out on the edge of the river and watch the bears out in front of you. It really is an absolutely magical experience. And the grizzlies come here between about August to October time to feast on the salmon moving up the Nekite River. It's one of the most amazing wildlife experiences anywhere in the world. And wherever you've got the grizzly bears, of course, you've got the salmon, you've got the scavengers such as bald eagles, and bald eagles are lining the rivers at Great Bear Lodge. So we have 3 nights here, so you can head out each day, 2 times a day up the river looking for to watch the grizzlies. They're also doing walks in the old growth rainforest as well. The food is amazing, the accommodation is fabulous, and it really is an absolutely magical place. So before I sign off and hand over to Adam and Jane, I'm just going to mention another trip we do to the region. This is a cruise up to, again, into the Great Bear Rainforest, but a little bit further north of Vancouver Island, up around Bella Bella and up near the Alaskan border. So it's a 7-night cruise, 10-day holiday aboard this small ship vessel called the Island Roamer. We're cruising for 7 nights through, again, the most amazing wild scenery, temperate rainforest, mountains, fjords, inlets, loads and loads of humpback whales. It's majestic, wonderful scenery. You're anchoring and mooring in these wonderfully peaceful fields with nobody else around. So if you really want a wilderness experience in the Pacific Northwest, this is without doubt the trip to do. But we're going here in particular to look for one of the most mythical creatures of the region, the spirit bear, or the Commodore bear. These are black bears. They're a rare genetic variant of the black bear, but they only occur in the rainforest close to the Alaskan border and down into a little bit into British Columbia. There's a place where we'll take you where you can sit on the edge of a river and you stand a very good chance of seeing this amazing animal coming down to feed on salmon. But we're also looking for black bears, grizzly bears, bald eagles, Dall's porpoise, and a very similar selection of wildlife than we're finding on the land-based trip. So I'll end here, end with a sunset over the Pacific Northwest, and just say thank you very much for listening. Thank you for joining us this evening again. If you've got any questions at all on our Western Canada trips, please do not hesitate to type them into the question answer, and I'll do my best to answer them, or of course give us a call at the Naturetrek office at any point. I will now pass over to Adam and Jane, and just bear with you 1 second. I will stop sharing, and over to Adam and Jane. Thank you.
There we go. Can everyone see our screen?
Hope so.
Yep,
Hello,
that's good.
everybody. Excellent. Hello, everybody. I'm Jane Dixon.
I'm Adam Dudley.
And we're based near Tucson in Southeast Arizona in the USA. We've been working with Naturetrek since the end of 2018. And when we're not leading tours and not looking at wildlife, we both work as contractors for pharmaceutical industry. So Andy asked us to give a little outline of how things have been during the pandemic in Arizona. All I can say is it's quite a politicized situation here, and we do live in a Republican state, so things have probably been quite different to what they've been like in the UK. We did have a lockdown, but things are very loose. And because of that, I think Adam and I have just made up our own safety protocols and stuck to them and stayed safe throughout. But anyway, we are not here to talk about COVID. We're here to talk about Arizona, and then Adam's going to talk about Texas and the Rio Grande. So I'm going to start off with the wildlife of Arizona's Sky Islands. And on my introduction slide here, I have a few species, the first of which is on the left, and this is a Rivolis, or a magnificent hummingbird. And this is the largest hummingbird in Arizona. And it's one of 14 species that we can see during certain times of the year. On the right-hand side here, we have a white-nosed coati, which is a member of the raccoon family. It's a tropical species and can be found all the way through to Central America. And these guys, they live in the oak forests and the mountains of the area. And it's wonderful to see them because the mothers and their little cubs live in huge bands. And sometimes you see troops of up to 50 running through the canyons, which is an amazing sight. And at the bottom, we have one of my favorites here, a Western diamondback rattlesnake. This is one of 13 species of rattlesnake that can be found in Arizona. And this species is the most common by far. And interestingly enough, last year, Adam and I saw over 20 individuals of Western diamondback rattlesnake. So moving on now, just to orientate everybody, this is Arizona, the whole state of Arizona, and it's down in the southwest of America, nestled between California, Utah, and New Mexico, and it shares its southern border with Mexico. International flights fly into Phoenix, which is the red blob in the center there. But we don't spend much time in Phoenix. We head straight down to Tucson, which you can see in the bottom right down there. And we explore the Sonoran Desert. Now, the Sonoran Desert is incredibly unique because it has more rain than any other desert in the world, on average about 10 inches a year. And it also has 2 rainy periods, the summer monsoon and also the winter rains. So because of the rain, there are over 2,000 species of plant, one of which is depicted at the top of this slide, and this is the famous saguaro cactus. So you can imagine not only the cactus, but all the other plants provide lots of food and shelter for wildlife. Thus, this is an incredibly diverse area. The other aspect that makes the Sonoran Desert so unique is the fact that it's a basin and range topography. So you have everything from about 2,000 feet up to over 10,000 feet on some of the highest mountain ranges. And of course, with each elevation, you get a different habitat. So you get everything from Sonoran Desert to scrub to grassland, oak and juniper forest, and right up to the pine trees. So again, this adds to the diversity of this area. So while we're staying in the southeast corner of Arizona in the Sonoran Desert, the accommodation is typically haciendas and casitas, which gives a wonderful flavor for Southwest America. A lot of the places we stay have gardens, which have feeders in them, so hummingbird feeders, bird feeders, a lot of butterflies, and of course, lots of wildlife. So as well as exploring the Sky Islands and all the different mountain ranges, we get to see some of the wildlife at the places we stay as well. And if you're interested in food, then obviously you get the typical American fare, plus there is the Mexican influence in this part of the world. So there's lots of great Mexican food to eat. So moving on, I'm now going to talk a little bit more about the wildlife of this part of the world. So in the top right, we have one of the common species, which is a greater roadrunner. And these guys are amazing to watch because they run around the desert hunting, and you will often see them catch lizards, small snakes. We've even seen them take small birds and even a baby rabbit, which was quite amazing and a bit sad to see. So, excuse me, the other specialty species of this area on the left, we have the elegant trogon. This is a very famous bird in this part of Arizona, and lots of people visit just to see the elegant trogon, and it can be found in the canyons and oak forests of the area. Another species which is incredibly popular is the Mexican spotted owl, and you can see that at the bottom there. There's a pair of them, and they're very specific to certain sites. So we have a couple of sites that we visit on our tours to go and find them. And if you look hard enough into the trees, you might eventually find them sitting there. And they, yeah, as you can see, these two guys are asleep, tucked together, very cute. Moving on to mammals. Okay, so on the left-hand side, I think, my personal opinion is that this is the cutest mammal in North America. So this is a ringlet. Sorry, a ringtail, not a ringlet, that's a butterfly. A ringtail, they are purely nocturnal mammals. So you have to go out at night with a flashlight and you're looking through the oak forests in the canyons. They run around up trees, down trees. You can see they're incredible climbers and they're obviously looking for food, but they do have a penchant for sugar water, and they will gladly hang from a hummingbird feeder and drink the whole contents. So the other two mammals on the right-hand side, the little guy at the bottom, he's a Harris's antelope squirrel. This is a very specialized ground squirrel of the area. And they're fleeting, and you see them running across the desert floor very, very fast, wagging their tails around. So they're quite an enigmatic species. And at the top there on the right, we have a pair of collared peccaries or javelinas. So these guys are distantly related to pigs. They live in they live in big groups and feed on prickly pears. So they're quite an amazing creature. Huge canines in order to bite on the cactus and feed. So moving on to butterflies, there are over 250 species of butterfly in Arizona. So of course I can't show them all. So here's a nice selection of some of the ones we can find on our tours. On the top right, we have an Arizona sister, another species found in the oak forests and the canyons. They're lovely when they flutter around above the treetops. It's very pretty. And when you see them from underneath, they almost look like a stained glass window. On the left-hand side, we have a very specialty species. This is the Arizona hairstreak. One of my favorites because of its absolutely gorgeous colors. These guys are found much, much higher in the mountain ridges, almost in the pine forests actually. And the bottom right, we have two-tailed swallowtail, which is the Arizona state butterfly. And as you can see, it's puddling on the edge of a stream, where you find them quite often actually. And you cannot go to Arizona without meeting some herbs. So first of all, the reptiles. I have a black-necked garter snake on the left here. So it's not all rattlesnakes, they're also colubrids, and quite a few of them actually. This one lives by the water where it catches its frogs and eats them, which is quite impressive to see. Have you ever had the look to see that? Top right, I have a Yarrow's spiny lizard. There are a number of spiny lizards in the area, but this one lives at the higher elevations. And as you can see by its colors, quite impressive too. And at the bottom, there is a Sonoran mud turtle. These are interesting because when there's a drought, they will actually bury into the mud so they can just hang out and wait until the rains arrive, when they will actually wander quite some way before they find a watercourse. And amphibians, oh my gosh, the top left, I think this guy might be my favorite with its great big goggly eyes. This is a Couch's spadefoot toad. They come out for 1 or 2 weeks a year during the monsoon. They're nocturnal, so again, you have to go out with your flashlight and search for them at night. And they come out to mate for that brief period, and they eat a lot of food during that time and then go back underground again, and the food lasts them until for another year. So it's incredible that they can actually eat so much that can take them through the next 11 months. We've also got a canyon tree frog on the right-hand side. Again, they're found on the high streams and rivers. And these are incredible creatures because they can camouflage, change their skin tone to camouflage themselves against the rocks that they're sitting on. And bottom left, we have a Chiricahua leopard frog. These are quite rare, but we do have a couple of sites where we can see them on our tours. And of course, again, crazy critters of Arizona. There are so many, but I could only pick a small selection. On the left, we've got a giant hairy scorpion. This is the largest scorpion that we have in Arizona. It's probably the least venomous though, so it's not too bad. And again, nighttime is the best time to see these guys, and you can find them quite easily with a normal torch. You don't even need a blue light because they're so big. And top right, we have a giant desert centipede. Very, very fast. We once found one in our bedroom. It was quite a challenge to catch it with a glass and put it back outside. But they're about probably 6 inches long. So it's quite a shock when you walk in your bedroom and find one on the carpet. And then the bottom right, we have a desert blonde tarantula. I could spend ages talking about these guys, but of course I can't. They come out during the monsoon season, and it's the males that you'll typically see because they're searching for a female to mate with. And then finally, we have one more slide of some specialities of the area, which we will certainly try hard to find. And the top left, we have a Montezuma quail, quite a shy bird, and they live in the grasslands. So they can hide easily. They're quite small, but they're incredibly stunning birds. So hopefully we'll find those. And then we have the Sonoran desert toad, not as pretty as the other two toads I showed you, but rather large, this one. And also it's very famous for the toxins that it secretes onto its skin, some of which are hallucinogenic, and some people partake apparently. And then we also have finally the red-faced warbler, which is a summer resident and it lives in the pine forest high up in the mountains. So again, we certainly search for that one too. And finally, we have a Gila monster who's appearing on the last slide, telling us about the upcoming tours to Arizona. The second spring, which is the monsoon period, our tour will be in August 2021, COVID willing, let's hope. And then the next tour will be Herpalooza, which obviously will focus on the reptiles and amphibians of the area, but of course we'll look for everything else as well. And that's in April 2022. So we hope to see you in Arizona. And now I'll hand over to Adam, who's going to talk about Texas.
Thanks very much, Jane. And yeah, I'm going to do a whistle-stop tour to Texas, where we will be engaging in a bird and butterfly extravaganza and hope to see some of the iconic species of this area, such as the whooping crane on the left, the absolutely stunning Mexican blue wing on the right, and the scissortail flycatcher, which is just one of the most incredible birds, I think, that we can find in America. So you all know where Texas is, I'm sure. It's the red state right in the center south, almost as far south as you can go in America. And we start our tour here on the right-hand side of the slide. You can see in Austin. And we do a sort of a clockwise loop from Austin down to the Gulf of Mexico, along the shores, and then along the border with Mexico, along the Rio Grande, where we actually will go through the wall to get to some reserves that are right on the river itself, and then back up to Austin via San Antonio. And this loop takes in a huge variety of different habitats like thorn scrub and the barrier islands on the Gulf Coast, including South Padre Island, one of the famous islands, and some very special habitats, a lowland hardwood forest, which contains a lot of the specialty species of this area. So starting in Austin, we'll see already some of the special Texas birds, such as the golden-fronted woodpecker on the left, which is actually quite a common bird in Texas, but the first encounter in Austin. And then black-crested titmouse, which is a northern Texas species that only just makes it to Austin, on the right of the slide. And then one of the jewels of southern North America, the vermilion flycatcher, which we can find in Arizona as well, but is particularly common in Texas and on this Texas tour. And from Austin, as we make our way down towards the coast, we will visit a couple of ranches, and that's one of the highlights of, in my view, of this tour, is that we visit some cattle ranches that the owners have actually won awards for transferring them from cattle ranching to wildlife management. And the first one, Barnhart Ranch, is where we encounter some of the more southern species, such as this beautiful green jay. These are amazingly characterful birds, are raucous, they travel in groups, and we should find them at all the different feeders that we'll visit on our tour, and especially as we're having lunch at Barnhart Ranch. And what's great about this reserve is ranch is it's right at the intersection of north and south flyways. And so we should have a good mixture of birds, both of the southern section of Texas, but also in the north. From there, we move to the coast, and one of the highlights of the trip is to go and try and see whooping cranes at a very special reserve called Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, which is the only place in the world to see the endangered whooping crane. In fact, it contains the only remaining natural population of whooping cranes in the world. This is the tallest North American bird, about as tall as Jane, 5'2", thereabouts. It's got a wingspan of about 7 feet, and it's amazing because on its wintering ground, you can see on this slide it's eating a blue crab, but it will also eat wolfberries that occur on the islands that we go out to see on a boat trip for over half a day. And you can see the pontoon boat there that we're on is excellent for photography, allows us to get really close to the cranes, and also if you like lying down like I do, to things like lesser yellowlegs at head height, and just very, very good photography. And from there we head south to the Rio Grande itself, and the Rio Grande Valley is the most exciting place in America for butterflying, and we've designed this tour to go in November, which is the peak season, where there's lots of nectar for butterflies to eat. And also there's lots of Mexican species that come up to spend the winter. And so there's a profusion of butterflies in this area. And that's because of butterfly gardens that are at all of the reserves along the Rio Grande. And we spend a lot of time with the birders looking at the birds and the butterflies looking at the butterflies in these reserves. So species such as the white peacock here on the left, the guava skipper, which is a very exciting butterfly for any butterflier to see, and the tropical leafwing here on the left, which is a speciality of this area. And we go to the National Butterfly Center, one of the best butterflying hotspots in North America, to see butterflies such as this. Moving further inland from the coast along the Rio Grande Valley are some of the premier birding destinations in the country. And we'll spend our days watching feeders, hiking trails, searching for raptors from platforms such as that at the bottom left here, which is at Benson State Park, and really exploring the bottomwood hardwood forest for birds such as Ultimara oriole and buff-bellied hummingbird, which have tiny, tiny ranges in the USA, and we should see those on this tour. As we move further west along the Rio Grande to the upper Rio Grande Valley, we may encounter other butterflies, such as the red-bordered pixie, which is shown here on this host tree with its chrysalises. Jane took this picture a couple of years ago. That's not a very common butterfly, nor is this dusky blue ground streak, a hair streak species, which is my favorite family of butterflies, on the right-hand side. And then some common butterflies, such as the Gulf fritillary, the orange butterfly on the bottom of the slide here. Some of my favorite birds that can be found in the Rio Grande Valley include America's largest kingfisher, ring kingfisher, with his beautiful orange underwings, the common paraki. And actually we try and play a game, see who can find one first, because they're incredibly cryptic among the leaf litter. See if anybody can actually spot one. And if we're really lucky, we may even run into a hook-billed kite, which is named after its bill, which it uses to eat tree snails. And that just makes it into the America along the Rio Grande Valley. Once we've had our fill in the Rio Grande Valley, we head back up towards Austin via a couple of different sites. One of our favorite places on this whole tour, top left here, Nolly Farm Ranch. Our friends Beth and Steve Nolly run this ranch, which used to be a cattle farm and is now a wildlife refuge, with their own sandhill crane roost at that pond that you can see there, which we delight in drinking our gin and tonics on their deck as the sandhill cranes come in for the evening. And for those who are interested, as we make our way back to Austin, we have some time to visit the Alamo on our way through. So with that, we have, hopefully, COVID willing, tour running in November this year to Texas. Of course, we don't just see birds and butterflies, we do see other things. So this fantastic 9-banded armadillo, which I think was at Nolly Farm Ranch when we were there. Mm-hmm. And we hope to see you on either in Arizona, our native Arizona, or in Texas. Thank you for listening, and happy to answer any questions via the Q&A feature going forward. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand back over to Kerry.
Thanks very, very much indeed, Adam and Jane and Paul before you. That's brilliant. So we're going to take just under a 10-minute break now. So you've all got time to go and charge your glasses, get some nibbles, whatever it is you'd like to do. And we'll be back at 8:25 when we'll be heading to Florida, followed by Yellowstone. So see you all shortly. Okay, welcome back everybody. I hope that you are all refreshed and ready to go to Florida. So over to Matthew to continue the evening.
Right, thank you very much, Kerry. Bear with me while I do a bit of screen sharing. Right, hopefully everybody can see that. Move this out of the way, hold on.
Looks good.
Cool, right, so welcome everybody. Thank you, Kerry, and I'm delighted to be able to join you. I hope you're all well, managing to cope in the current circumstances. My name is Matthew Capper. Now, I've been a Naturetrek leader for a couple of years now, although my day job is head of public engagement and communications for Lincolnshire Wildlife Trust. And I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey to Florida. Now, ordinarily, I'd be preparing to head off there actually in the next few days, as this is a trip that goes in February, but sadly not this year, which is a bit of a shame. However, I've been going here on and off for just short of 20 years. It's one of my favorite places in the world, I think it's fair to say. And in my opinion, it's actually one of the best winter birding destinations for UK nature lovers. Oh, I don't know why that's moved on, hold on. Go back one. So, if we have a little look where we're heading to, so Florida is in the southeastern United States. It's actually the southernmost point of the mainland US. You've got the Gulf of Mexico on one side, the Atlantic Ocean on the other. We get 300 days of sunshine per year in Florida. So this is literally the place where suntan lotion was invented. We generally have temperatures into the mid-20s. It's the drier part of the year when we go. So we generally get away rain-free. And this trip is very much focused on birding. It's a really great introduction to American birds. So plenty of the common stuff that you'd expect. Many of the migrants from further north, they winter in the state. But it's also far enough south to have a few more kind of exotic influences on the bird life too. It's fair to say this is a photographer's dream. So you have great light, it's stuffed full of birds, and they're often incredibly close. I always give people one word of warning though for this particular trip. In Florida, it is illegal. I don't know why that's moving forward. Sorry, I do apologize. It is illegal to sing in public if you're wearing swimwear. So do please bear that in mind if you do come on the trip. Now, if we focus in a little bit, you can see the outline itinerary here. And we fly into Orlando. We crisscross the state, taking in some of the best and most famous wildlife spots on the way, before flying home from Miami. Our accommodation is comfortable chain hotels, so things like Comfort Inns, Marriott's, often with suites, so they're pretty well appointed, which is nice. And the great thing is that this itinerary takes you through a variety of different habitats. It means the wildlife changes regularly as the trip progresses. So we definitely pack a lot in over the 10 days that we're there. So let's get started. So our first morning, we start with a gentle introduction to Florida's birds. Generally take people to somewhere close to the hotel. This is a place called Lakeshore Park in Kissimmee. And immediately we'll be seeing lots of wetland birds. So Florida is stuffed full of herons, egrets, and other similar birds. Things like the weird looking limpkin here on the top left, also called the wailing bird. If you hear them call, you'll know why. In the middle here, we have a snowy egret. On the top right, we've got little blue heron. Down in the bottom left there, there's sandhill cranes. They're normally just wandering around very close. My thing seems to have a mind of its own. I don't know how to stop it doing this. It keeps moving on a slide. I do apologize. We've got great blue heron though here in the bottom, in the middle, and down on the bottom right, we've got white ibis. These things just seem to roam the neighborhoods like some sort of teenage gang. They're quite cool things, white ibis. And we're also very quickly seeing things like grackles. This is a common grackle in the top left. But we'll get boat-tailed grackle too. We'll have red-winged blackbirds. We'll see warblers as well, such as this yellow-rumped warbler here. And others like pine and palm warbler, black and white warbler. They're really very common too. So we can expect to see probably about 10 different species of warbler on the trip. So it's a really good introduction to what can be a quite tricky group of birds, the American warblers. And we spend most of that first day out in the Florida countryside, south of Kissimmee, heading down to a place called Joe Overstreet Landing. This is an area of open countryside with small bits of woodland, large ranches with cattle. It's home to things like Savannah sparrow. There's lots of killdeer out in the fields, plenty of common birds like American kestrel. We should get wild turkey. You can always hear eastern meadowlarks calling away, really nice fluty song. Flocks of sandhill cranes can be hundreds strong. It's a really lovely noise as they go over calling. And it's also the best area to look for crested caracara, which is the one in this photo here. They can often perch down low by the side of the road like this, so you can get some really excellent views if you're lucky. And eventually we arrive down at the boat landing at Joe Overstreet on Lake Kissimmee. And there's a boardwalk there with a viewing area. It's excellent for birds, including this, which is a snail kite. And population in Florida of these things is probably less than 400 breeding birds. So it's a federally listed bird on the endangered list. They're really quite stunning. You can see the white rump here on this bird. And their diet consists almost exclusively of apple snails. These are quite big, chunky snails. And the snail kites have evolved a slightly off-center beak. So when they're putting their beak into the shell, it means that the beak curves round and they can pluck the snail out of the shell more easily. It's a fantastic bit of evolution. Paul was talking about these earlier, so we have a couple of active bald eagle nests at Joe Overstreet. We'll check those out. Sometimes you can get the real privilege of being able to see chicks in the nest, which is really nice. Really good concentration of bald eagles in Florida, so it is a species that we should get to see well during the course of the trip. And one of the highlights of the trip, I think, is the next day when we visit Merritt Island. So Cape Canaveral is the home of NASA's Space Center. But when they bought the land, what they didn't need was turned into a big, massive wildlife refuge. So it's really quite cool driving around during the day and having this backdrop of massive rocket launch pads. Now there are several wildlife drives, so we spend a bit of time slowly driving and stopping periodically, looking at the wildfowl and the waders. And we'll also look for this species here, which is Florida scrub jay. This is Florida's only endemic bird. The entrance to the Canaveral seashore is a great place to look for them. And these things, they form family parties. So generally, if we see one, we'll see several. Very tame. As you can see, this bird here that I photographed, color ringed. A lot of the scrub jays in Florida are color ringed for a long-term study of the population. And if you're really lucky, you sometimes find these things out during the day. Again, this was mentioned earlier. This is a 9-banded armadillo. If there's been rain and the ground is soft, we often see them out a bit more likely in the day. They've got really poor eyesight and they're often pretty oblivious to the presence of humans. it means actually that you can get really close. This particular one that I photographed last year actually walked over somebody's foot. And one of the birds we look for around the visitor centre here is this. This is painted bunting. I think talking to the clients, this is often top of their wanted list on the trip. And as the name suggests, I think if you gave a child a blank bird and asked them to just colour it in, you know, this is what they'd draw, painted bunting. So these are quite stunning. And after our day on Merritt Island, we head south to the West Palm Beach area. This is home to Donald Trump alongside some wonderful wetlands. And we visit a couple of these down here, Green Cay, which is photographed here, and a place called Waxahachie. Both of these have circular boardwalks, about a couple of miles long, and it allows you just to wander through the reserve and see a wide variety of birds and other wildlife. It can be really good for snakes, things like that. And it's often really quite hard to get people to leave, to the point where we've actually amended the itinerary to stay here another night, just to give people a little bit extra time to enjoy the site. And Waxahachie, this has a colony of woodstock, which is the one here on the left. They stand in the trees just 3 or 4 meters from the boardwalk. These things nest colonially, so their breeding season is initiated really by changes in water level, so they can breed anytime between November and August. And both sites, really, really good, excellent places to look for American bittern, which is the one here on the right. These are a winter visitor to Florida. Again, with a lot of these birds, incredibly tame. This one here was almost underneath the boardwalk. Just took that photo with a compact camera. And of course, we'll get to see plenty of alligators. The Florida population's about 2 million. Florida and Louisiana have the bulk of the US's alligators, and we tend to get lots of those. Now, after West Palm Beach, we're zipping across the state, heading over to the west. We stay in Fort Myers, which is right next to the causeway that takes you over to one of my absolute favorite places, to Sanibel Island. And this is where my wife and I have generally based ourselves when we visited. And on Sanibel, we go to the J. Ending Darling Wildlife Preserve, named after J. Norwood Darling, who was a famous political cartoonist and conservationist. And as with Merritt Island, this place has got a nice wildlife drive. The Americans don't do walking, they like a good wildlife drive. And if the tide is out, there can be hundreds of waders and wildfowl using the reserve. Fantastic spectacle. Things like these blue-winged teal. This thing is moving forward on its own, and I'm not sure how to stop it, I have to say. So yes, we have blue-winged teal here down in the bottom, willet, but there'll be lots of other ducks and waders out there. A couple of specialities of Sanibel here. On the left is reddish egret. This is one of the more localized and rarer heron species that we hope to see. Another here on the right is the roseate spoonbill. This is the only spoonbill species found in the Americas. This one will be in a mature adult because it doesn't have any feathers on its head. It's fair to say the older they get, probably similar to some blokes, I'm afraid, the older they get, the bolder they get. So you can tell this is an adult bird. And one thing I insist on for every trip is that we end the day on the beach on Sanibel or the neighbouring smaller Captiva Island. You've got mile after mile of unspoilt sandy beach, and we just give everybody a bit of time, free time to potter along, maybe look for a few shells, have a bit of time to relax, and just watch the sun slowly sink into the Gulf of Mexico. Just a really nice way to end the day. And if we haven't seen manatees by this point, we try and build in a stop at the Lee County Manatee Park. This is basically next to the water outlet from electricity power station, sorry. Doesn't sound the most appealing, but it's actually a really nice spot, as you can see. And the chances of seeing manatees here in February is normally very good. Last year when we went, we saw about 20. Seeing manatees elsewhere really very much depends on the water temperature. So if it's below 68 degrees Fahrenheit, they move south. But the warm water coming out of the power station is well into the 70s, and the manatees hang out in the warm water. So they venture out into the Gulf to feed, and then they come back to warm up again. And it means they can stay much further north than they might otherwise have done. Another famous reserve we visit, Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. This is a National Audubon Society reserve. And this is an amazing place. Huge, tall cypress trees with massive buttress roots standing in the swamp. Lots of epiphytes growing on them. Really, really atmospheric. There's another boardwalk running through here, and we spend the whole morning here just exploring along the boardwalk. And as ever, huge amount to see. There might be raccoons under the boardwalk. We'll see great crested flycatcher. There's always red-shouldered hawk. And you can often hear barred owl. They have this nice "who cooks for you" call. And this is one that we saw here on the left last year, just snoozing by the boardwalk. And it's full of woodpeckers. So red-bellied woodpecker, yellow-bellied sapsucker, downy woodpecker, acorn woodpecker. This one here is a pileated. This is the largest one in the US, the classic woody woodpecker. As a kid, I loved Woody the woodpecker, so I always like seeing these. I'm not sure if anybody else remembers Woody the woodpecker though. And moving on, so we're right down in the south of the state now, and we spend the last couple of nights in Homestead. This is the gateway to the Everglades, and we'll spend a whole day exploring what has to be one of the most famous wetlands on earth, I think. Huge expanse of water, long grass, just as far as the eye can see. But wherever you get these little slightly elevated areas, just dry enough for trees to grow, you get these little bits of woodland that the Americans call hammocks. And we'll bird a few of these too, including one that local birders have called Lucky Hammock, because of all the good birds that they've found there over the years. And we might see one of these things. Again, Adam already mentioned these. This is a scissor-tailed flycatcher. These are stunning birds. And a few of them winter down in Florida, and Lucky Hammock's one of the best places to see those. And when the vultures start to rise in the morning down here, we scan them for short-tailed hawk. The Everglades is the area where the vast majority of the US's 150 pairs overwinter. So this is a small isolated population in Florida that all head south to the bottom of the state during the winter, and it's the best place in the world, the best place in the US, to be fair, to try and get this particular species. And of course, it wouldn't be the Everglades without taking in some of the wetlands, such as here. This is the Anhinga Trail. The waters are crystal clear. And you just get to watch the whole of the underwater life just beneath you, for the fish, the turtles swimming under the water, the anhingas. You can just watch it all from the boardwalk. It's absolutely brilliant. One of my favorite bits of the trip. This is an anhinga here on the right. Like cormorants, they've got no waterproofing for their feathers. So when they fish, they get waterlogged and they gradually sink. Now we choose our parking space here at the Anhinga Trail carefully. I always park close to the visitor centre, because if you park further out, there's a risk that the vultures can become a little unruly. It's fun to watch if it's somebody else's car, but not so much if it's your own. And as we head down into the Everglades, we get down to flamingo at the very bottom. And one of the things we look for here is American crocodile. Now, Florida is really unusual. It's the only place on Earth where alligators and crocodiles can be found in the same place. But in contrast to the alligators, there's only about 1,500 of these things in Florida, so much harder to see. And flamingo is probably the best place in the state and our best chance to get one of these things. Now, our last day is relatively relaxed. We spend it in the Miami area ahead of catching the flight home. We try to keep things flexible to give us time to catch up with anything we might have missed, such as a burrowing owl here on the left. So there's a couple of sites up our sleeves in case we still need this. But Miami is also well known for the range of exotic species that have been introduced or escaped over the years, many of which are now established on the US list. So we might get common myna, red-whiskered bulbul, and there's been an incredible 68 different species of parrot and parakeet recorded in the Miami area, such as these mitred parakeets. These are one of the more easily seen that we should get during the last day. Matheson Hammock State Park here, it's a great place just to sit, relax, have lunch on that final day, and just to have a final look at some of the warblers and vireos that we'll have seen over the week. Possibly something like this, a yellow-throated warbler here, really, really stunning birds. The yellow throat just shines in the Florida sunshine, really, really nice. And it's also full of lizards, like these red-headed agamas. These would normally be found in West Africa. And iguanas too, these on the right here. These were first recorded in Florida in 2007. There were just 5 sightings. But there are thousands of them now in the Miami area, and Matheson Park is full of them. So that's it. So there you have it. That was, I have to say, a bit of a romp around some of the best wildlife spots in Florida. But hopefully it's entertained a little, whetted your appetites. Over the course of the week, I think we should really probably see 150, 160 species of bird, great supporting cast of things like the alligators, dolphins maybe, manatees, things like that. I can't compete with Adam, but we also get a nice selection of butterflies, including some of the ones that he had in his talk. Other things like dragonflies, which is nice. But if you do choose to come, I hope you'd love the place just as much as I do. Any questions, as Kerry said earlier, we'll try to answer them, put them on the Q&A. Otherwise, the team at Naturetrek will be very happy to help. There's some information up on the screen. But other than that, really, thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand you over to David.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you. Okay, bear with me a moment while I just share my screen. Okay, well, thank you very much again, Matt, and thank you for attending, everybody. My name's David Phillips. I'm one of the operations managers based in the office, the Naturetrek office near Alton in Hampshire. And I manage a series of tours, mostly in Europe, Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, some of the Mediterranean islands, but also some odd destinations such as Taiwan and Namibia, and also Yellowstone and Grand Teton in the US. I took on this particular tour because I was fortunate enough to visit Yellowstone a couple of times over recent years, and it's a place that I'm incredibly fond of. It's a beautiful destination, absolutely stunning, and so I'm happy to share some of that with you this evening. I'd like to mention that we actually do 3 different tours in Yellowstone. We actually have a very similar itinerary for all 3, but they operate at different seasons. So we have a spring tour, which is predominantly what I'll talk about today, which is in June. We have an autumn tour, a fall tour, autumn in fall, as they like to say in the US, and that runs in September. And then we have a winter trip, which is in January. And they, as I say, follow a very similar route. And they all fly into Jackson Hole in Wyoming. So just for the So you can get your bearings here on the US, the star at the top left-hand corner of the state of Wyoming there in the sort of Midwest. That is where Yellowstone and Grand Teton are. And Jackson, the town that we fly into, is at the southern end of these two national parks. So this is the map showing the route followed by the trip. We fly into Jackson, or Jackson Hole, which is just north of the town of Jackson, and spend 4 nights there. And we travel around the national park of the Grand Tetons, and then make our way up into Yellowstone from there and travel around the park of Yellowstone before then finishing up at Gardner to the north. But as I say, each of the trips follows essentially the same itinerary, except for the winter tour, in as much as it diverts out into Idaho to get up to West Yellowstone on the western side of the map there, because during the winter time it's impossible to travel between the two national parks due to the amount of snow on the ground at that time of year. But as you fly into Jackson, or Jackson Hole Airport, which is just up in the park, you're immediately greeted with what is one of the most glorious scenes from an airport I've ever visited. This is getting off the United Airlines flight, and as you can see behind the plane there is the most extraordinary backdrop, the range of the Grand Teton Mountains. This is a 40-mile long stretch of mountain range, some of them exceeding 4,000 meters in height. And this, as you say, greets you as you fly in, and it's quite a great introduction. And then you get off the flight and you drive down to the town of Jackson, or Jackson Hole. As I say, the whole view as you drive down is of the mountains, and you're really just overcome by the sheer beauty of them. And if you arrive for the spring trip, this particular picture here I took in June when I arrived, and many of the meadows around by the airport and right across the sort of flats leading up to the mountains are just coated in flowers. This is a flower called the arrow-leaved balsam root, beautiful yellow daisy family plant, and they are all over the prairie there and the sagebrush areas, as I say, leading up towards the mountains. And from the airport, you drop down to Jackson itself, the little town. It's a medium-sized town, but a very pleasant little place to spend the first 4 nights of your trip. It's got a wealth of shops and art galleries and photographic galleries and outdoor shops, restaurants and cafes. It really is a very pleasant little place to spend your first few days in the country. And whilst you're staying in Jackson, you're visiting the Grand Teton National Park. This national park essentially runs to the east of the mountain range that you saw as you came in, and from the mountains, dropping down from the mountains, you see a series of lakes, such as this one, which is Bradley Lake, and these are a series of glacial lakes which are all formed along the eastern side of the mountains. Terrific scenery. This is one viewpoint that you go to as you drive around the park, which is famous because of the fact Ansel Adams back in 1942 took a photograph of the Teton Mountains from this very lookout. And there are boards there that you can see the black and white photograph that he took back in 1942, showing exactly the same scene. But this is the mountains in the background, dropping away to the flats, and then the river, the Snake River, in the foreground. There are 2 rivers that run through this park. The Snake River is the main one, and the Gros Ventre River to the east of it, and they converge just north of Jackson. The mountains are fairly young geologically. They formed about 8 or 9 million years ago from a thrust fault pushing them up, and in fact they're still increasing in height, and there are occasionally little tremors as the fault moves further up, and you can in places see where that has happened and where vegetation has been exposed on the mountains there. But it's a geologically very interesting area. Ecologically and biologically, it's an absolutely terrific area to see. Fantastic plant life, as I say, in the springtime. Lots of silver lupin there along the riverbanks, columbine there, or Aquilegia species on the right, but many flowers. It really is terrifically beautiful and floral area. But also, of course, lots and lots of animals to see. And in fact, the area of Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Park has the largest concentration of mammals anywhere in the 48 contiguous states. And whilst you're driving around both Grand Teton and Yellowstone, you'll see these species, the elk up in the top left-hand corner, closely related to our red deer, of course, the pronghorn in the upper right, very much a classic American species, the bison, the American bison, that is, down in the bottom left, and these are a species that are real icons of the parks there. 100+ years ago, they were almost eradicated from or sent into extinction. There were only perhaps a couple of dozen pairs or animals left, but over the years, the management of the parks there enabled them to be able to move around and grow in numbers, and now there are around about 5,000 free-ranging, free-moving bison in between Grand Teton and Yellowstone parks. And then in the bottom right is a moose, the same species we have here in Europe there, and again quite sort of commonly seen. So these are all four of these species here you will almost certainly see within the parks. They really are quite widely spread and commonly seen. Less commonly seen are the bears, but nonetheless, most of our trips over there, pretty well all the trips do get to encounter both black bears and grizzly bears, or brown bears, during the tours there. This is a brown bear, or grizzly as they call them in the US, or that particular subspecies. And they, as I say, are sort of fairly commonly seen in various parts of the park. There are about 170 individuals within the Yellowstone Park itself. It is a sort of quite a high concentration of them. But also, as well as the big mammals, there are a lot of small mammals as well. As I say, it's the largest concentration of mammals anywhere in the US. And many of those, 67 species of mammals, are quite small. So you have the least chipmunk there, a very small little squirrel-like species there, lovely little thing. The Uinta ground squirrels to the upper right there. Down to the bottom right is an American pika. These you see up on the sort of boulders at the bottom, at the sort of foot of the mountains. There's some boulder areas, and you'll see the pikas scurrying around, collecting up material ready for their hibernation period. And then in the bottom left is the American badger. This actually is not it's not unrelated to our badger. It's a mustelid again, but it's about half the size of our badger. And these actually eat a lot of the other small rodents there. So they'll be digging up the ground, looking for the burrows of those ground squirrels and eating those. So where the other three are all vegetarians, the American badger there is most definitely not. It survives by eating several of these little critters every day, unfortunately for them. And of course, where there are lots of the mammals there's also a wealth of bird life. And in the springtime, many birds are migrating up from the south, from Central America and southern states. And the western tanager is this bird on the left-hand side here. It's not actually a tanager. It's now part of the cardinal family, but it's a beautiful bird, and perhaps the most beautiful bird I think in this area is the mountain bluebird, which is the bird on the right, and that's a lovely bird to see. This is a bird of the Mexico and southern parts of the states during the winter period, but migrates right up through the Rockies to its breeding locations in places like Yellowstone and the Tetons. And then we move north into the Yellowstone National Park itself. This is just one of the signs in the entrance area. The two parts aren't quite contiguous. There is an area, a conservation area between, but then you move up into Yellowstone. And when you get to Yellowstone, there is a network of roads that lead around the park, which roughly form a figure of 8 and join up many of the main sites, main places of interest, both geologically and naturally historical regions of the park. Of course, Yellowstone is very famous for having a magma chamber beneath the soil there, only a few miles beneath. So there's a lot of geothermal activity going on. There are a lot of hot water pools all over the park, but in specific places, there are many of them. So these are some of the beautifully coloured pools that you see as you travel around the park. Some of them immediately as you get into the park at an area called West Thumb, and another over at one of the sort of geyser basins. But there are a number of sites where you see these terrific sort of pools, and there's boardwalks around so that you can take a good look at them, with lots of information boards as well to see. It's also, of course, a place of the geothermal activity there produces the geysers, and the most famous of all is the Old Faithful geyser. This one is termed Faithful because it erupts very regularly, roughly every 90 minutes. So it's quite predictable, and the times that it's due to erupt is posted on the notice board not far from where it occurs. So you know you can't quite set your clock by it, but you can certainly be positioned ready for when it does start to go off. And that's quite a phenomenal sight to see. It's about a plume of steam 20-30 meters in height. A little distance on from the area where the geysers are is perhaps one of the most beautiful and amazing sights of Yellowstone. This is the Grand Prismatic Spring. It's one of the largest, the third largest geothermal pool in the world, the biggest in this part of the world, and phenomenally colourful, rainbow colours. And these colours are formed from the extremophile bacteria which live within the water, and those bacteria create carotenoid pigments to protect themselves from the UV radiation. And as the water moves further and further away from the place where it erupts from in the center, so it cools down and less of these carotenoids are required. So the bacteria take on different colors, which resemble almost the sort of spectral colors. And it's called Grand Prismatic Spring. And it's a remarkable sight. All around the spring, there are flowers. So in a place that you might expect to be devoid of life, far from it. In fact, the boardwalk on the right-hand picture there is right by Grand Prismatic Spring, and right at the side are fringed gentians. This is the symbol of the park. Beautiful blue flowers, and there's stonecrop down there in the bottom left, spearleaf stonecrop, and a plant called pussy paws up in the right, the upper left there. Some lovely flowers all around, even in places, as I say, that you wouldn't necessarily expect there to be great floral things to see. And another great sight of Yellowstone is some of the waterfalls. This is the lower falls on the Yellowstone River. The Yellowstone River flows out of the lake Yellowstone, flows north, and just by the lower falls here forms part of the Yellowstone Grand Canyon. And this is a remarkable sight, and you get to see it from various locations around. And indeed, you can go right to what they call the brink of the falls and stand right where the falls are going over the precipice. A fantastic sight. Another great sight of the Yellowstone area are these travertines. This is an area called called Mammoth, and these are the Mammoth travertines, which is basically where hot water percolating out of the ground has a lot of calcium carbonate within it, and then that comes out of solution as the water cools, and you get these terraces of sort of limestone formation or calcium carbonate formation, and they're coloured again by bacteria. So those rust colours and green colours are because of the bacteria that forms in the water. And in and around those travertines, we have the killdeer, this bird that in fact Matthew mentioned earlier, plover, member of the plover family. They feed on the invertebrates in the water there, and you see them scuttling around, running around in the travertines, and you get very close views of them. Then the latter part of the trips, we go into an area called the Lamar Valley, and this is where one of the places where we see many of the bison. As I say, it's the one of the key, probably one of the best environmental issues, if you like, or most fantastic things that's happened environmentally in the States has been the protection of the bison, and the fact that there are now over 5,000 of them free roaming in this park. And you do see them fairly well throughout the parks, both parks, as you travel. But the Lamar Valley is almost like the Serengeti of the US. It's a place where there are so many of them, as well as many other pronghorn and elk and moose in the same sort of area. So it's a great area for herbivores, as well as then the predators, the wolves, and as well that prey on them. Like I say, we do this trip at different times of year, and this particular picture is shots from the autumn. So this is back in the Grand Tetons. In the autumn or the fall is when all the trees are changing colour. So the aspens are going very yellow, and there are maples there, and there are cottonwood trees as well. So it's a time with beautiful colour. As you can see from this photograph as well, very colourful landscape there in the autumn time. But the other time that we run this tour is during the winter. So in January, we have our trip, which is, as I say, slightly different itinerary because the roads between the two parks are impassable. So we have to do a slightly longer route around between Jackson and West Yellowstone. But this really, the time that we visit in January is really a fantastically beautiful time because there's so much snow everywhere, and the chance of then seeing some of the mammals there is higher. It's increased. So wolves and coyotes and the like are the more chance of seeing them because of the sort of backdrop of the white snow there. And to get about, we use these snowmobiles. So it enables us to get to places where ordinary cars just can't reach. And this is one of our groups there in front of the snowmobile, and from the snowmobile, great position. You're high up and able to take photographs out of the animals in the snow. So you get, again, fantastic views of the bison. They're surviving it, really roughing it out through the winter time, and many other species as well of mammal, like the red fox there, the same species we have. The coyote there in the bottom right. You see those during the winter time more commonly. Still plenty of bird life about, obviously not the breeding migrants that we have during the springtime, but some winter specialities such as the sage grouse there on the top left, the Clark's nutcracker, the Steller's jay down in the bottom left, and the pine grosbeak down in the lower right there. So some lovely birds about even during those winter periods. But I think what a lot of people want to see during that winter, the winter trips, are the wolves, the grey wolves. In the park, there are a growing number of the wolves there. Well, actually, they're sort of plateauing out the numbers now, about 170 within the park itself. But these were introduced back in the mid-90s. There were no wolves in the early 90s, but mid-90s they were introduced, and they're doing very well, and they are affecting the whole ecosystem because they are preying on the elk and the moose, and that in turn is having knock-on effects to the ecology of the ecosystem. But this is entirely natural. This is how the park was before man intervened and killed the wolves or reduced the wolves' numbers. So this is, again, a sensational and well documented project to reintroduce the wolves back into Yellowstone. And they are quite most commonly seen during our winter trips. And this particular single male was seen quite close by a group only this last January, and but more commonly you see them at a greater distance. You'll see a packs of 10 or 15 individuals. For this particular male had probably come from one of those packs and was looking to form perhaps another pack. But that's, as I say, one of the great sights of going there in the winter, and the hope would always be to see and have a great view like this of the wolves. So that's the end of my talk about Yellowstone. Thank you very much for listening to that. We'll be very happy to, of course, take some questions afterwards, but I will end there and hand you back to Kerry. So thanks very much.
Thank you, David. Okay, so I hope people enjoyed this evening and these fantastic destinations we've been hearing about. Thanks to David and Matthew who spoke before him. So we'll take a few moments now, next 20 minutes or so, to answer some questions that you've all been putting to us during the course of the evening. I am going to start by trying to answer some of these COVID questions that have been cropping up on both on the Q&A, and I've seen one on the chat as well. So I'm going to try and wrap those up all in one go just before we kick off with some of the more fun questions about tours. I would just say that this evening is about inspiring you for travel when we're able to go again. We're not expecting that to be next week. We know there's a lot of hurdles to overcome in the UK, in the USA, around the world. So yeah, that's probably the first thing to say on that. We don't know how vaccine passports might work out, when travel corridors might reopen, that sort of thing. Boris doesn't know, Joe Biden doesn't know, we definitely don't know. But we'll keep our fingers crossed, we'll sit tight, we'll see what happens over the coming weeks and keep positive and keep hopeful. A few people have asked about insurance, and I think someone asked about what happens with travel insurance if the FCO is advising against travel and does that invalidate your insurance? It doesn't. If you're booking a holiday with us for this year, for next year, you should still take out your travel insurance. I mean, there are all sorts of things that can happen completely aside from COVID that you'll want to be covered for. If you break your leg, if you get a medical diagnosis, something like that, that means you can't travel, you still need to have insurance in place. So take out your travel insurance. There are now various companies out there, including the one that we recommend, Campbell Irvine, that also will cover for COVID if you're diagnosed with COVID before travel, if you get it on holiday and need medical treatment, or if you have a direct contact and track and trace tells you to self-isolate. You just need to check all the details on that. I think what you're thinking of with the Foreign Office advice is that you're not covered to travel to a country whilst that advice is in place. So if you book a holiday, you have your insurance in place, and then you travel to even just to France next week against Foreign Office advice, then yes, your travel insurance is invalidated. You'd have to take out a special policy to be able to do that. However, we're a tour operator, we're fully bonded, we do not run our tours against travel advice. So if you booked a holiday with us to the USA, to anywhere, and the Foreign Office is advising against all travel to that country, we will not be operating your tour. So we'll keep in touch with you, we'll advise you in the run up to the trip. And ultimately, if the Foreign Office advises against travel to that country, that region, we won't go ahead and we'll offer you the choice of a full refund or to rebook to a future departure. So in that respect, you don't need to worry about the Foreign Office advice part of things because we won't be running in that circumstance anyway. So I hope that clears up the insurance bit. And was there something else about COVID that I saw? Let me just double check. We talked about vaccine passports. Yeah, I think about different regulations in different states in the USA. Yes, they are different, and we don't really know what will happen over the coming months. It's kind of the same as here. We just have to sit tight and wait and see how vaccine programs and the like pan out and what happens. So I hope that clears things up enough in terms of COVID. So let's have a look at a few other questions that we've got. So Adam and Jane, there were a few weather related questions for Arizona and Texas that you were chatting about. I wondered if you might just share a little bit more on expected weather on those two trips.
Okay, I'll start with Arizona. So in August, it's definitely the monsoon. It can be quite warm, but we spend most of the tour at the higher elevations where it's much cooler. The rain usually comes in the afternoon, so we'll obviously, if it's a dreadful downpour, obviously you have to rearrange your activities to take that into consideration. But typically it doesn't really have that much impact on what we're doing. You might have to sit out a quick sort of drenching for a little while, but to be honest, it's not too bad. And it's actually very pleasant. After the rains, everything cools down and a lot of the animals come out, and especially at night, there's a lot of snakes to be seen on the road. So the rains actually help with regard to the wildlife. But typically, yes, it doesn't have a huge impact, and it's a nice cooling effect. In April, it's very pleasant, it's sunny, temperatures are getting up a little higher, it's probably mid-20s Celsius, and very little rain. Can be cool, lovely, but it's very pleasant, to be honest, in April. Yeah,
for Texas, it's pretty mild. Actually, we're quite far south. they're nearly further south about the Keys, the Florida Keys. So it's a very nice, humid type of heat. Very little rain again. It's basically a really nice time of year to be there.
Perfect. And actually, whilst we got you, there were a couple of birding relating questions for Texas, I think specifically. Jennifer asked if you like to see the courting dance of the whooping cranes, and Stephen asked how many birds you might typically see, and would you see roadrunner on the Texas trips?
Right, yeah, so whooping cranes, yes, they're not at their full peak of their dancing, but they dance all year. So yes, there's a really good chance of seeing them dancing, and just the noise, I mean, the sound they make when they're doing their dances and everything is fantastic. What you will see more of is much more territorial behavior between the males, chasing each other all around the place and things like that. So that's pretty cool to see. And yes, roadrunners, yeah, we'll see roadrunners. I shouldn't say you always see them, but yes, you see roadrunners very commonly. And we normally get about 200 species of bird in the trip. And what I would say is that up to about 40 of those are only found along that Rio Grande corridor. And so that's why we go there, because it's the only place in America that you can see those birds.
Perfect, thank you. There was one for David about chances of seeing the aurora on the Yellowstone winter trip.
Yeah, yes. As I think I answered it and said it's a possibility, but actually Yellowstone isn't that far south. The latitude of Yellowstone is around about 45 degrees north, so it's comparable with sort of Bordeaux in Europe. So really, the chances of northern lights are pretty slim. Historically, you might have had more chance of seeing northern lights in the US and Canada because of the fact the geomagnetic pole was actually in northern Canada, but it is moving now quite quickly northwards towards the geographic North Pole. So in fact, there's very little difference now. The auroral oval, as we call it, is pretty much centered on the North Pole. So as I say, because Yellowstone is 45 degrees south, it has about the same sort of chance of seeing the northern lights probably as we do here in the south of England. So not very much so, and unless you had a really phenomenally strong geomagnetic disturbance, i.e. material coming in from the sun, a coronal mass ejection on the sun, which produced a really big outburst of auroral activity like we've had in the last few weeks, and seen from cameras and people taking photographs from Shetland and places like that. But even then, I think Yellowstone is probably, would be very, very marginal as to whether it would get to see any. So it's not really a place to go for that. Alaska, however, that's a very, very good place to go for northern lights. Obviously, it's that much further north, as of course is Iceland and Norway, which we'll be talking about in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, do join us. We've got a Northern Europe evening coming up in a few weeks' time, so that's the one to join if you're a Northern Lights hunter. There's a birding question here for you, Paul. Can you see surfbirds and rock sandpiper on the September trip to Vancouver Island? That's from Ian.
Surfbird, yes, good chance of seeing surfbird. Rock sandpiper, I've not seen them on my trips over there. I guess it's a possibility. Not the three rock waders you normally get are the oyster catcher, black oyster catcher, black turnstone, and surfbird. So those three, yes. Rock sandpiper, probably not, but a possibility, I guess.
Okay, and another question for you, Paul. Can you combine the Canada West Tour with the Spirit Bear cruise? You might need to look at your dates for that, or do you know?
The answer to that is typically no, unfortunately, because they overlap.
You have to do one year, one the next.
But what we could possibly look into is the boat operators who we use for the Spirit Bear cruise run a series of cruises through August and September. So we could certainly see if there's another one of their cruises actually does tailor in with the Naturetrek Western Canada trip. So anything's possible. Okay,
so see Paul if that sounds like a good idea to you. David, another one for you just popped in. What sort of accommodation do we use on the Grand Teton and the Yellowstone trip?
So the hotels that we stay in Jackson Town City and also West Yellowstone and up in Bozeman and Cook City are comfortable hotels. A bit like Matthew was sort of saying, I forget exactly how he described the sort of hotels there, but they're a good standard. Obviously all ensuite, clean, comfortable hotel rooms. Often, as with American hotels, are often much bigger rooms and bigger beds than we're used to over here in Europe. But they're good standard hotels. They're not luxurious, but they're very clean, comfortable, good standard hotels.
And someone's just followed that up with, are any of them in the park?
No, they're not. They're just outside the park in each instance.
There's a question that came in a little while ago, and I'll follow up one to it about single travellers. Margaret asked if we take single travellers on our trips. So the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Plenty of single travellers, and I would say it's very unusual to have a group that's entirely made up of couples. That is a real rarity. We tend to have a nice mixture of couples, of singles, of friends travelling together. Sometimes we have people who have met as a single traveller on a tour, found themselves a great travelling partner, and then booked together after that. That sort of thing happens a lot. So yes, absolutely. You can book, as a single traveller, you can book on a sharing basis. So if you're happy to share a twin room throughout the tour, then you book on a sharing basis. If not, there is normally a single room supplement, and that means you have a single room throughout the tour instead. Now, June's just followed that up saying the cost of the single supplement can sometimes be quite prohibitive. It can be, and probably the USA is one of the worst places for that, because you get charged a room rate no matter how many people are in there. So if there's 2 of you in there, it's half the price as if there's 1 of you in there. So it can rack up. We do advertise share options. So if you're looking to book on a tour, knowing someone will be ready, is already booked to share with you, you can either give us a call in the office, but also on the tour page on the website, when you click down under the dates and prices, it will note if there is a female or a male share already available, or both. We also have an article in our newsletters each month advertising available shares. And I think, someone can correct me if I'm wrong on this, if you go on our tour calendar, which is just linked from our main homepage, there's a whole list of every tour forever, and that will also indicate where there are share options as well. So if you want to specifically book a tour knowing you've already got someone lined up to share with and you won't charge a single supplement, then that's the way to do it. Hope that helps on that one. What else do we have? I like the Peter Phillips saying, how big was that scorpion?
10 inches? No, 10, sorry, wrong unit, centimetres, 10 centimetres.
Been in the USA too long.
Small ones that you have to be wary of, though. The Arizona bark scorpions, they're really, really tiny, and they're the most venomous.
So always the little ones to watch out for, right?
Yes, you can be careful of the small ones, not the big ones.
At least you can see the big ones coming.
Yes, that's right.
There's a question which is probably sort of to everyone here. I'm not sure which one. Adam and Jane, you answered it. For Margaret Bell, are any meals included on these trips? So quite possibly, if it was during your talk, it was related to Arizona and Texas. But it's a good one, actually, because it does vary. Around the world, generally, most of our tours include all the meals, but the USA, I would say, is a bit of an exception. Can I just quick check? Matthew, on Florida, do you know off the top of your head, is it?
Yeah, no, Florida, the meals aren't included. So what we tend to do is pick up a packed lunch at some point during the day, and then we go to somewhere in the evening, but people pay for their own meals.
Yeah, and Yellowstone?
So Yellowstone, they are included. I think there's 1 or 2 exceptions, but virtually every meal is included. Again, sometimes it's a packed lunch to go out for the day, they're included, as I say, barring 1 or 2 odd meals throughout a tour.
Paul, I think you said Canada's all included, is it? West.
Paul's frozen by the look of it.
Paul's frozen.
Paul's frozen.
I think he told me that
all included apart from the
lost signal.
Yeah, we can hear you, Paul.
It's one of those kids on the iPad again, taking up your bandwidth. Not to worry. And then, so yeah, I think Adam and Jane answered directly. So on that one, We just include breakfast for those ones. And actually, we started off when we first set up those tours, including all meals, and we changed our minds on it. We just felt in the USA that we were including an awful lot of food that not everyone always wanted to eat. You could end up having 3 huge meals a day, and obviously if it's all included in the package, you're paying for it. So whilst, you know, around the world we normally would include everything, it just didn't actually feel like great value in the end in the States. And it's quite nice to be able to pick what you want a bit more and have a lighter lunch, or, you know, not have 3 courses of a set menu every single night. So it's worked a bit better, I think, hasn't it? Taking that cost out and paying for that locally instead.
It works well. Definitely.
Yeah, and I know it's the same in New England on that tour as well. We don't include the lunches and dinners just for that reason. Someone's asked whether we sell Naturetrek holidays worldwide or just to UK clients, and are there language issues? Obviously we're a UK tour operator and our main client base is here in the UK, but we take bookings from anywhere in the world, and we do get bookings from all over. It's really nice actually when you get people booking from elsewhere in the group. It adds nice diversity and lots of interest within the group makeup. So that, anyone can book. We offer like a flights inclusive package and a land only package. So normally our overseas clients will book land only. They'll organise their own flights and meet us on arrival in the country. And language issues, I mean, we run English speaking tours, so all our tour leaders, all our local guides, everyone will be English speaking, and that'll be the main language throughout the trip.
I've had Americans and Canadians on the Florida trip.
Have you? Interesting. Ooh, temperatures on the winter Yellowstone trip, David.
Yes, it certainly does get quite cold there in the winter, as you could see from the pictures I was showing, and I mean probably -10, you know, and lower sometimes. So you really do need to be wrapped up well. You need to have good clothing, hats, gloves, down jackets, thermal underwear, and all of that sort of thing for sure, and good boots to keep you warm. But the vehicles are warm, the hotels are warm. But obviously you are out during the daytime, so yeah, it pays to have a good clothing, and it can get quite cold for sure, well below 0.
More weather questions. Weather on the Western Canada trip for Paul, and biting insects, someone else has added.
Right, okay. Well, it is a rainforest we're exploring, so you have to expect a little bit of rain, but September is often a pretty stable month around Vancouver, so we typically find that we have a mix of some sunny days and some showery days, so actually not that dissimilar to what we get over here in the UK in September. But it's normally pretty mild. It's not really that cold. Biting insects, I've never really found them to be much of a problem. On a couple of occasions up in the Great Bear Rainforest, if it's particularly warm and still, you sometimes get the little black flies coming out. But yeah, it's not normally a problem at all, and certainly no great clouds of mosquitoes that you might get up in, say, Alaska in the middle of the summer. It's nothing like that.
Perfect. Perhaps Paul, you can do this. One more question here. How many people are usually on a tour?
Well, if we're talking about Canada, then the maximum we take is 10 on that one. Naturetrek tours in general, we take a maximum of 16 people, but in a lot of the tours we actually cap at smaller numbers than that. So if a tour, for example, goes to Costa Rica and involves a lot of walking along rainforest trails, then we'll cap at 8 to 10. Some of our photography tours may only take 4 or 5. So it does vary from tour to tour, but it's a maximum on any tour of 16, unless we're chartering a ship, and then we take a few more. But yeah, Canada is 10, and yeah, I'm not sure about the
I think the others are all similar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
10 to 12.
You've just reminded me that I spotted a question in the chat actually, I think from Karen, about whether we offer any pre-trip sort of photo or video courses just to enable you to make the most of the wildlife watching. So no, we don't specifically do that. I mean, our tours are primarily wildlife watching. They're not specific video trips or photography trips. We do offer a selection of wildlife photography trips. Pop on our website and have a look at those. That said, a lot of our clients do enjoy photography, come with their cameras and want to get some nice photos. We did a huge number of day trips last summer when we were not able to do anything else and go overseas, and we offered some really nice wildlife photography workshop day trips within that portfolio, and we'll be doing that again this year. So days for the Red Deer Rut on Bempton Cliffs to photograph seabirds. We did a macro photography beginner workshop, that sort of thing. So that might be something you can consider joining. They were £50 for a day and great tour leader helping you get the most out of your camera. So perhaps have a look at those if that appeals. I think we have answered everything. If there are any more final questions, just having a little scroll down, make sure we've got everything. Oh, there's a few more popped in. Matthew, would you recommend any extensions to the Florida trip?
People tend to stay on in the Miami area afterwards. What I would say actually is Miami is one of the main American gateways down to Costa Rica. So that can be a good way of doing a 2-destination trip. So that would work quite well.
Perfect, thank you. Someone was asked, Lynn has asked about transport. Now for most tours, this is sort of small minibuses, 8-seaters, 12-seaters, that sort of thing. Is everyone nodding in agreement regarding their tours? Yeah, no one does anything different. Paul,
Well,
maybe Canada.
Slightly different for Western Canada. We use a minibus. It's so-called 16-seater minibus, but you could never get 16 people into these sorts of minibuses. So for a group of say 10 Naturetrek clients and a tour leader, we have a 16-seater minibus, and we also hire an SUV, 4 or 5-seater SUV as well. So we have 2 vehicles just to make sure there's plenty of room for everybody and nobody's cramped. Yeah,
great. Someone's asked if there's an upper age limit. No, we just ask that you are fit enough to join the tour, that you're able to do everything, keep up, and that you're fully insured. So no upper age limit. And one for Paul, is there going to be a Great Bear Rainforest cruise in 2022?
Yes, there will be.
Yeah.
I'm in the process of getting that sorted, so hopefully dates soon.
Keep an eye on the website.
Yeah.
You can register your interest with us if you want to be alerted when that's ready. Just email info@naturetrek.co.uk. And Jane says, I spent a week on the island Roma, torrential rain for over half a week. I grew to love the rain. That's the attitude that we like. You're exploring the rainforests. Sounds great. So I think that's everything. We've just gone over time now, so we're going to wrap it up there. I'd like to say thank you very much to our wonderful speakers, David, Paul, Matthew, Adam and Jane. Thank you for speaking this evening, for keeping us entertained on another dark February night. If you really enjoyed this evening and would like to book a speaker for your own Natural History Club or Society, then we do offer free talks for the likes of RSPB groups and whatnot, whether that's on Zoom in the coming months or when we're back in person, whenever that may be. You could have a look on our website on the Book a Speaker page, and if you would like to explore that, just let us know. We will be back tomorrow night. We are going to be talking about go slow holidays. So I'll be here again, accompanied by a couple of my colleagues from the office, taking you to go slow destinations all over the world. We will stay on here just for a couple more minutes, just in case there are any very last minute questions. But otherwise, thank you once again for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.